Reggie? What was you whining all about, huh? What was that all about? You getting ready for class, so you're cranking up the wine? Is that what you're doing? Oh, you're a silly boy. Yes, you are. You're ridiculous. Yes, you are. You're ridiculous. You say hi to everybody. Say hi to our friends who are in the room. Well, on the stream. They're on the stream, Bubba. They're in the flow. The flow of the stream. Okay, you go lay down on your bed. Go on your bed. No, that's not where your bed is. You know. Reggie, on your bed. Go lay down. That isn't even what I mean. You are the worst guide dog ever. Come on.
Tony up here?
Yeah, we're getting ready to broadcast. Then
Okay, I don't have to go back.
we're streaming. Just saying. I should like my students to know about your medical condition.
No.
Oh, probably not, right? What's that? Oh, look, my husband brought me M&M's. That is awesome. Thank you. No, you don't get M&M's, Reggie. They're going in my drawer. Sorry.
Hazelnut M&M.
Hazelnut M&M's even? Wow. Fun to be at my house. All right, well, we can get started here in a few minutes. Everybody just settle back and can you all hear the music? The music is from this really cool channel on YouTube. So, you know, I believe that music and sound in particular plays a big role in our mood, our ability to function well, to remember. Music is huge. It's the one thing that lights up your entire brain at the same time, not just the frontal lobe or your hearing center or your imagination. Everything's lit up like a Christmas tree when you listen to music. Beautiful thing about music and frequency and sound, all important. So if you're finding it hard to concentrate or study, it might be a good idea to check out on YouTube Focus Music. And this particular station that has Focus Music, this channel on YouTube, is called Lo-Fi Hip Hop Radio. Beats to relax and study to. So that's Lo-Fi Hip Hop Radio. So it's just like these cool jams in the background, nothing too distracting, but it also has kind of a beat and a consistency to it that helps you to focus. Oh, the name of the company, you'll like this, Chilled Cow. Chilled Cow is the production company behind this, so check it out on YouTube, it's fun. But for now, I'll stop it. Okay, Chilled Cow, you need to be quiet now. No. It's got a lag to it today, the computer does, but we will still get by. Yes, we will. All right, let me grab my notes here. What time is that?
9:30.
Oh, good. How many people are in the room?
5.
5. Okay, well, it's 9:30. There's 5 of you. That means that 4 of you are still missing, but I'm going to go ahead and take attendance and we're going to get started. And they can catch up by watching the video on YouTube if they miss part of this. Or not. I mean, that's unfortunate, but anyway, let's go ahead and take attendance. Who's here?
Will.
Hey, Will, how's it going?
Eli.
Which Eli?
Just says Eli.
Which Eli are you, Eli? There's 2 of you. Remember? 1 and 2.
We'll move on. Conlon
Hello, Conlon.
and Meg.
Hey, Meg. Eli, which Eli are you?
And Devon.
Hey, Devon.
W.
Oh, okay. That's all I needed to know. Anybody else? Got Devon, Meg, Conlon, Eli W, and Will. Okay.
Eli says his speaker's messed up.
Your speaker is messed up. Can everybody else hear me okay? Post yes if you can hear the sound feed okay with on your end.
Oh, Meg says yes.
All right. Well, I hope you get that fixed, Eli. Maybe you can use another device to reconnect, but everybody muddles through and does the best they can. I don't have a production company here, that's for sure. Although John's doing a very good job, so yay, John, for recording all this and editing things and uploading them to YouTube. So, if you missed class on Tuesday here on Twitch, Com301, Teal College, Radio Broadcast Production, this is it. If that's what you're looking for, you've come to the right place. John is going to keep an eye out for people who like to bounce in on these streams and just play games and have fun and act really mature. So, he'll be maybe muting some visitors who might bounce in. Megan, would you mind being a co-moderator with John to help keep the chat stream free of unwanted visitors? Troublemakers specifically.
She said yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, the lag between me talking and you being able to respond is 6 seconds. So it's a little bit like watching CNN when they have a reporter in the middle of a war scene somewhere and there's like this lag between the two broadcasts. Yeah, it gets a little weird, but that's okay. We'll work it out. So, I'm going to give my attendance list to John.
I will be back.
Okay, well then you can just pick it up when you come back. Alright, so John will be back. Don't be surprised if sometimes the stream on this Twitch feed drops. If it does, stick around. We'll be back in a minute or two, get reconnected, but I've noticed that happens sometimes, so figure class is going to end around 10:45, and if we disconnect before that, just stick around. If I haven't dismissed class, we just dropped the feed. It's all getting used to this crazy distance stuff that everybody has to do. Social distancing, learning distancing, gathering distancing. It's a strange new world. So hopefully, though, not forever. Hopefully by next month things will feel and be more normal, and little by little we'll be able to get back to whatever normal was. So I wanted to let you guys know that all last week and up until yesterday I'd been waiting for the coronavirus test results. After I got back from New York City with Meg and the rest of the WXTC and TCTV students, that Friday the 13th, I had a fever and wasn't feeling good. And I wasn't feeling good for days after that. And Monday I went and after that I got tested. And my doctor felt I should be because I was in this epicenter in New York City. And I was showing some kind of symptoms of not being well. I had a fever and all this stuff. So she sent me to get the testing done. And I had to wait a week and a half from Harrisburg to get it back. A week and a half. Like, it's just crazy. But the good news is I don't have it. I do have something I'm fighting, and it's just some sort of virus, but it's not the virus. It's not coronavirus. So it's good to know that, because I have elderly friends and people in my life, my brother-in-law, who have like compromised immune systems, a lot of people. So don't want to be Typhoid Mary, don't want to be spreading this if I don't have to. And I hope you're okay with being resolved to playing your part in not spreading this too, because it is a dangerous virus, and not just for people my age and older or people with compromised immune systems. Right now my son is sick, and don't want to get too personal on his behalf, because that would be wrong too. But you know, he's a firefighter, and he is from New York City, the epicenter of where all of this is the worst right now in our country. And first line responders are often confronted with this kind of stuff even before the rest of us are. So he's sick, he's quarantined right now, but you know, his wife and kids are okay, and he is in touch with his doctor, and he can breathe pretty well. But, you know, just know, like, he's a 39-year-old strapping big dude. He's 6'2" and 220 pounds, and works out, runs, played football all through high school, college, and then played football for the fire department. So, you know, he's an active person. He's pretty healthy. He's knocked down with, we're not sure if it's this or if it's something else, but they're not bothering to test right now. They're just saying if you have these symptoms, just stay home and be isolated and quarantine. I'm not. I'm fine now. Don't have to worry about that, but other people aren't, and more people are starting to know people whose lives are impacted by this in one way or another. It's not a joke. Staying home isn't a joke. But we have a good role to play in all of this. The more I think about it, the more I feel like our Live 365 station could really be uplifting and a lot of fun. It could be a distraction for you guys right now, something that you have to do for credit, but is also entertaining and easily accessible for you to create something with. And what you create could be the thing that somebody who's quarantined in the house and hasn't had much contact with other people trips across when they're on the internet, and just scanning through Live 365, and maybe your words and your songs, your choices will be something that uplifts them that day. So we can play a positive role in all of this, and it's not hard. So in all of that, I want to just also say Eli Williams got his show up and running first. So Eli, good job. And it's pretty good. He's, you know, still got some growing to do. Everybody does. This is a whole other kind of broadcasting, and it has to be more evergreen. It has to be more sustainable over days, because it rotates through our station. Your show will rotate through our station. So Eli's would come up, and then maybe Devin's would come up, and then maybe Megan's would come up, maybe Conlon, that kind of thing, right? So one after the other after the other. Anyway, so it's a different kind of broadcasting. So the content of what you're talking about, you have to think about. For instance, doing the weather, you could maybe do an outlook for the week overall. That would be okay for content. But, you know, remember, that's very contemporaneous. That's very not evergreen, because that's fleeting information that's old news by tomorrow or the next day. And this playlist is going to rotate for a week. So the information and the content in it needs to be relevant for the week. So you can give scores, you could give celebrity updates, you could talk about current events and things that are happening in the now. That's fine, but just remember to be a little more broad and general in your dating of these things. Think about it that way, right? Don't necessarily refer to the day when you're making your voice track, right? So, and that again, it goes for things that are very fleeting, like the weather. You could do some of that. You could talk about what, like I said, what the week is going to be like, but don't necessarily worry about specific forecasts. But there are things that you can talk about. You can go online and look for tips and ideas of things to do when you're stuck in the house, right? How to get motivated to do that project you've been putting off all this time now that you're stuck in the house. You know, there's all sorts of lifestyle and helpful things that you could be spreading to listeners about how they can better spend their time. Like taking a class online, like still continuing your studies no matter what, right? Gives you some structure and things. Well, some people don't even have that. So there's some really good information out there that you guys could look up and use as part of your banter. I suggest that you guys check out Live 365's stream, listen to Eli, his playlist that's up there. John, is yours up?
Not yet.
So even my stepson John is creating a playlist because this just seems like a fun thing to do right now and a positive thing to do right now. So
Also, Eli wants to know, do we still do a show every week?
yes, every week your playlist changes. So I'll send out emails to remind you that it's time to start rebuilding your playlist. Also, I'm going to find a way to credit the voice tracks that you guys are making as audio production work. So we can actually fulfill some of that requirement. It's not as in-depth as I would have wanted to go, but it's something. And right now we have to work with what we have. We have to work with something. But I think that doing that kind of voice track work and fitting it in properly, that is audio production. And even building your playlist in a digital platform like this is something like audio production. What we're doing here is what a music director does or a program director does, and maybe they do it together in a radio station, in a commercial radio station. So they'll take the music that they want to line up and they'll insert breaks, and then in those inserts, maybe the break is for an announcer voice, a DJ voice. It'll say that in the log that they create. It's a list of a lineup of what you're doing right now, a playlist, right? So top of the hour in the playlist would be the legal ID, and then maybe some music, and maybe an insert for a voice over, either as a voice insert, voice track, which a lot of commercial stations do, especially for overnight shifts. They'll have you do voice tracking, just like what we're doing right now. You just create a voice recording of what it is that you want to say and insert it between wherever it is it's supposed to go. And you're building your playlist that way as a show. And so this is really very similar to what program and music directors are doing. So music directors will put in the music, and based on what's hot or what that station carries, changing things up a little bit because maybe the rotation's a little bit stale. Usually those things get changed up weekly in commercial radio stations. At least some songs are inserted in and out of the playlist. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty much what they do. And then the program director is the one that will make sure that commercials that sponsors have paid for are in there, that there's enough public service and announcements in their lineup, that there's a news break built in. So together they build this playlist that goes out over the air. So sometimes if a DJ is live and the log is playing through the automated music system, it'll play the legal ID, it'll play a couple of songs, and then it will stop. And usually the program director will put in how much time he wants the announcer, the DJ, to talk for. So maybe it's a 2-minute break, and it'll say right there for the announcer, for the DJ, and they'll see I've got 2 minutes to talk about whatever. Maybe it'll even have an insert that says 2 minutes weather, and so then they fire off the intro music, and that has the underbed for the weather, and they speak over that and deliver live weather, and then hit the outro button for that song, for that bit of audio, to end the weather broadcast, the weather announcement. So this is really what you're doing is radio broadcasting. It's just only out on a digital platform right now. You're learning a little bit more about programming than you ever would have if you were at the radio station. You did all of that on paper and with Spotify and stuff. And on the fly, in the moment. This is pre-producing things, which gives you an opportunity to make it really golden. If you get to pre-produce your voice, that means you get to take out or start over again if you have too many ums in it. Or if you rambled on and you listen back and you're like, well, that was just about ridiculous. Believe me, I'm having a few of those moments of my own. When I watch the YouTube videos back, I'm like, oh my God, there's a reason I did radio. I don't like this whole thing. You find all your faults when you're watching yourself. And you find them when you're listening to yourself too. But again, so point being, you have the opportunity to make the show as good as you feel like you can make it, right? You have days to put it together. So does that answer your question? And then some?
Yes.
Okay, who else has any questions pertaining to building your playlist show or Live 365 in general? So you all feel comfortable with Live 365? You feel like you can work this out? There are categories I created on the media library, that tab that you click on that says media, and you can upload your music into different categories if you want to, and I think there is a category when you're building your playlist. If you click on categories of music and you search for like ads, just the ads will come up and you can insert them in the places that you want them to go. So mess around with that. You guys have the ability, because you have the password and the username and all of that, to create other playlists. So if you want to have 2 playlists ready, you could do it like Devon 1 and Devon 2. But make sure that you label tracks, especially your voice tracks, very carefully so that other people don't confuse them with theirs, right? So if it's Eli voice track, it should maybe be EWVT and then number 1. So Eli Williams voice track number 1. Maybe, if it's Devon, it should be DB voice track VT number 1 or number 2, whatever it is. This way you all at a glance can see in the category for that if it's your voice track right away or if it's somebody else's, and you can select the right things that you need. Do you have questions about that? It's not a hard system to use. It's all really in the playing with it and the building of it. So that's why you pre-plan the building of it through your show logs. So again, show logs are due. Get them in as, get them done, and get them, as soon as you get them done, get them into me and through the Moodle assignment link. All right, let me take so planning again with your show log is going to be a little bit different than when you did broadcast terrestrial radio. You know, you're going to remind yourself about things like insert voice track number 1. And you know, go to insert commercial break. So you're going to have kind of a different way of talking to yourself about this. All right, one more time, just asking. Anybody have any creating your playlist show or live 365 questions or things that they're not sure about? Okay, no? All right, well, if you do, you can email me and I'll get back to you pretty quick. I've been leaving my email open, so that's why you hear that boom every once in a while, because my email is open for college. So, told you about your show logs. You want to go over, let's go over your online assignments really quick on Moodle so that you guys are all clear about what needs to happen. So far in the forum, only 2 people have participated. These are easy grades for you. They're here for you to be able to build your grades up. Some of you don't necessarily need that. They're also here, they're designed to make you think about whatever topic it is we're talking about this week. This week we're talking about DJs and their role in the music, in the radio industry, and how that sort of shifted and changed over the years, how the trajectory of it is different than it was before. It's, what the position is even like is different from when it started in the beginning. So you should, as soon as you have your show log together, stick it there in the show log, online show log number 1. So we're starting a new count. You should have 4 shows that you do for Live 365. You are more than welcome to do more. Eli, not you, you still, now you're caught up. So you still owe 4 shows starting now, okay? Everybody, do you understand that? If you don't, email me and I'll let you know more about it, but you are caught up from your backlog. You owe, as of this moment right now, you owe 4 shows. 4 weeks worth of, and you know, we've got 6 weeks left of school pretty much, right? So we've got time for this. It's not going to be crazy. Again, I want you to notice too that under this assignment for online show log number 1, there are links within the description. Anytime I mention the word show log, that's a link right there to the actual template for the show log that if you don't have handy, you can get anytime by clicking on the word show log here in the description for the assignment link for your online show log number 1. And then your grade for your actual playlist show that you put together will go in this next link right there. So everybody should be clear about that. This is your weekly forum assignment about the American DJ, and it says what kind of style and presentation should a radio DJ have, and what do you like the best, and that's what your discussion has to be. So far only 2 of you have done it. Like I said, it's an easy grade. It's a way to build up your grades. It doesn't take more than a few minutes to do, and I shouldn't have to convince you of this because, you know, you're home during a pandemic. What else do you have to do? Maybe you have other things to do, but you also have this to do, so get this done. Then you have a think response assignment. So it's just a little thought paper, and it's not even a paper, it's more of a couple of paragraphs. So not crazy. The assignment is going to be graded as a quiz, though. It's going to go in your quiz category, again, helping to build up your grade, keep your grades up. It's due Saturday, March 28th by 8 p.m., and the assignment should be done in MS Word, not anything else, please. MS Word, that's what you need to submit it with. And it needs to be 200 to 250 words long. So that's basically a few paragraphs. That's not a lot of writing. And the rubric is writing mechanics are 20. So yeah, punctuation and spelling and things like that matter. This is academic, so it's not a text message. Make sure that you pay attention to that part of your assignment. The content of your answer is 80%. So it's really just two things, like how do you answer? And there's no wrong answer because it's really your opinion. From the things that you've learned about what people like currently in radio style and how people used to present themselves or play a part in radio broadcast production, right? That it's really your perspective. So it says right here, what styles appeal to you the most, and how does your favorite station, how do their DJs sort of line up with the station? Do they reflect the brand? Do they sound like the music that they're playing? Is it compatible? So those are the things I want you to think about. So that's the prompt, right? And so just make sure I have this right for you because I don't want to mislead you. This is something that you need to watch though before you go ahead and do the thought response, the think response. So it's the history of the DJ, part 4 from a series of history of radio that you don't need to watch all of right now. Just this section, part 4, talks about the 1940s and 50s when radio personalities sort of changed and morphed. So I want you to watch that video and then do the think response assignment, and it's due on Saturday. Any questions about that assignment? It's pretty straightforward, right? Not hard. Won't take too much time, but you do need to get it done. I had office hours this week already. So down here, there's a link that says weekly forum grade credit. You don't need to submit anything. That's just where I'm going to submit your grade for having participated in the forum. So if you haven't done that yet, like I said, get busy. I don't know what you're waiting for, but you've got those 2 assignments, the forum and the think response, and the video to watch. And yeah, so there's that. And your show to put together. So you be busy. You got things to do. All right. Did that. Checked in on Live 365. Online assignments. All right. So before I start with the lecture, do we have any questions about assignments, about building your radio show, about Live 365, about what I want from your life, the meaning of life? Do you have any questions? Okay, the other thing I want to ask is, has anybody new come into the room that did not get counted for attendance? It's not coronavirus. It's just whatever it is I'm fighting off that made me think I might have had it. But it ain't that. Okay. Nobody else has come in?
Nope.
Okay. So, let's talk about DJs. This seems like the glamorous part about being in radio. Really, it's not where the big money is. In order to make it big as a radio personality, you gotta hit a bunch of lottery tickets. This is not an easy thing to do, to become like a nationally syndicated radio personality the way Howard Stern is, or the way Ryan Seacrest is. His radio work led him into all other forms of media, and so did Howard Stern's. But that doesn't happen for the vast majority of radio hosts. They're considered the dispensable staff, and oftentimes radio stations will switch owners and formats, and things happen in a very hush-hush way. If word gets out about new ownership of a station or a network or something like that, all sorts of other repercussions within the business happen. So those kinds of bits of information are kept on the down low until you walk into work one morning and find a pink slip in your mailbox because they've changed formats and your style doesn't work with them anymore. So if you had a country station and now it's become, urban contemporary, the country sounding DJ that has that vibe that I'm trying to get you guys to listen for. This is why I'm giving you these assignments, right? I'm giving you these assignments because I want you to listen for the subtle differences or even the overt, obvious differences in the way that somebody who is a DJ on a country station sounds as opposed to somebody who's on an inner city urban contemporary kind of pop and hip hop station, as opposed to somebody who's on a classic rock station. Like, they all have a different vibe to them. And that's again why I'm having you do these assignments, because I want you to key in and focus on and analyze their style, and it will help you to improve your style for whatever it is the vibe of your show is, right? It'll help you kind of line up with that. Anyway, so you come into work and you may not even have a job anymore because the stations just suddenly changed formats. And this happens on a regular basis. Small markets, large markets. The DJs, the one out front, they're the ones that, MC all the community events and do remote broadcasts, and they're kind of the minor celebrities of the community. But as soon as something changes and they're not needed anymore, they're a dime a dozen. Lots of people, want this kind of a gig, is the way that the owners look at it. And unless they have like a really huge following and they're a special personality, again, their radio DJs are dispensable. Who's not dispensable at a radio station? The people that bring in the cha-ching, the people who bring the money in. Ad sales, copywriting, promotions and advancement of the radio station. Those people make pretty decent money. Technology-oriented people who are able to interface IT with broadcast technology and produce and create things using that technology, they get decent money. And oftentimes, if you're on air, you should have one of these other skills in your back pocket, because even in medium-sized markets, not just small markets, you're asked to wear a few different hats. So the way that you become an important part of that radio station isn't just your on-air sparkly personality, it's also the fact that you write good ad copy. You do good voice work for commercial work or for PSAs, voiceover, whatever kinds of in-house production the radio station's doing. So, and management also makes decent money in this field. But, the radio DJs had sort of a shaky existence all through radio. Early radio announcers were accessories. They were not the focal point of the broadcast. So think about this. In the early 1920s, when radio is starting to take off, most people are getting entertainment. Movies are still a new thing, right? The narrative way of telling a story in a silent film is much like this too. Before electronic media, before movies, and before radio, people were told stories in books and in print. And most times in stories, they're told from a third-person narrative perspective. It links in together and joins together, right? It provides the narrative voice provides cohesiveness to the story. It gives background information. It connects the dots for the reader. That's the function of the narrative voice in writing, is to connect it. That is how radio announcers sort of approached their jobs in the early days of radio. They were narrators of radio. So aside from announcing the weather, they didn't do a lot of commentary on things. They didn't draw attention to themselves. They would introduce the next thing that was coming up. They would inform the listening audience of what they were listening to. They would give some live read stuff themselves, like I said, the weather, maybe the farm report. It depends on the community too, and how formal they sounded. But for the most part, remember, people spoke and sounded and dressed and acted much more formally back in those days. So that's why when you hear early radio announcers from like the 20s and 30s and all the way through till the end of the 40s, they're very stiff and formal announcer man voices, and they are not the center of attention at all. They don't even have a name for the most part. So that was the early job of the DJ. And disc jockey is what DJ stands for, right? That phrase didn't get coined until the end of the 1940s, and I forget the exact story, but it's in that video that I'm having you guys watch, so pay attention to that part. The phrase DJ, after radio went from being mostly live performance and dramatic and comedy series content, things like that, and it went to a music format, music was on these discs, right? That's what records are. They're these discs. So some reporter coined the phrase, or some social commentator coined the phrase disc jockey, because they're kind of like, and disc jockeys had a lot of power back in the early days of radio. Even up to now, they still do. But not as much as they did up to the time of payola, which we will talk about. So they were stiff, formal, mainly announced the news, the time of day, the weather, local items, and they front sold upcoming national or in-house produced shows. That was their job. It was not glamorous. They were just the voice, the narrative voice that was connecting one thing to another to another. When radio stars and shows jumped over to television, radio, again, you know, we've talked about this, had to reinvent itself. Announcers became entertainers, and that's when things changed.
Peg,
Yes.
EJ wants to know if you can help him build a show.
EJ.
Yes.
EJ is Elijah Hodges, is that right? Email me about this and explain a little bit more about what you think you need from me about this, because I'll get you hooked up and figure it out, but just don't know what part you're at with all of this and what you need explained to you about. But I'm guessing that that's not Elijah Williams, because he's already up and running, so it must be Elijah H., which means that Elijah H. is in class and needs to be counted.
Already has been.
Huh?
Already has been.
Oh, okay. Let me know about these things, John. Okay. So now I want to get back to the lecture because we need to. But email me about that, Elijah, EJ, you person. Anyway, so now announcers are starting to be radio stars themselves. So I guess the idea back then was that just playing music wasn't entertaining and lively enough, and that more personality and input on the part of the host that's turning the tables and choosing the music. And back then, DJs chose their own music. And so they were under the influence, or they were subject to a lot of influence from sound recording companies, and that's how payola happened. Because DJs had a lot of freedom back then in the early 1950s up through the early 1960s to be able to choose their own music and format their shows the way that they wanted to. They could be subject to bribery and influence. They weren't paid a lot to begin with, right? So it wasn't even a far stretch to imagine, and it wasn't against the law either, that Columbia or RCA or another record company that has a star they're trying to promote, or a single that they just dropped and they're trying to promote, would offer a radio personality back then who had a good listening base and was influential, money, cars, jewelry, trips, all kinds of luxury things to like put their star, their new record, into heavy rotation on their shows. because again, they had a big listening base. So payola, again, that was what this was, and all radio hosts, all DJs were doing this. It wasn't just a sacred few under the table bad guys. Like, this was common industry practice. And everybody from Dick Clark to Wolfman Jack to Cousin Brucey to Alan Freed, Casey Kasem, every early rock and roll DJ from the late 1950s into the 1960s, when this became illegal, practiced this. So I'm going to show you a quick video about the payola scandal. It's not that long, but I want you to hear a little more in depth about it. Because it changed, again, you know, DJs at this time had a lot of power and influence, and they were celebrities in and of themselves. They had over-the-top personalities. They were the Pied Pipers of the youth culture. And people like Cousin Brucey, who had a show in the New York tri-state area from the late 1950s all the way through till the late 1990s, early 2000s. So that's a very long time, right? That's like 50 years just on broadcast radio, playing early rock and roll. And when times and styles shifted and changed, he did not change his format. He went to oldies stations and developed a different, stronger following in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Very well-known radio personality, Cousin Brucey. Bruce Morrow is his name. And, you know, he would come out in 1962 or 63 for public appearances wearing these tiger striped not leisure suits, but three-piece suits, like, you know, really dressed hip mod, over the top, kind of crazy. I called everybody cousin, still does. He's still on the air. He's on Sirius XM, on an oldie station, doo-wop and late 1950s, 1960s rock and roll. And the radio station, one of the radio stations that he was a big personality at in the New York metropolitan area, had a regular event during the summer at a place called Palisades Park. It was an amusement park on the Hudson River that overlooked the Hudson. It was gorgeous. Right on the other side of the Hudson River in New Jersey from New York City. And it was a place that a lot of teens and young people gathered to, especially on the weekends and in the evening during the summer. It had a water park, it had rides and other things, and so it was just, and you could walk in for free. You just had to buy ride tickets, so you could be in the vibe and the scene. You just couldn't go on the Ferris wheel or the roller coaster unless you bought a ticket for it. They would have these concerts there at Palisades Park, and Cousin Brucey would host them on behalf of the station. It was the radio station doing this as a promotion for the radio station, kind of, you know, develop its brand, reach out to its listening base, which were all teenagers and young adults. Anyways, so, yeah, Cousin Brucey was wild and over the top. And he, along with everybody else, participated in payola, but only Alan Freed ended up losing his career and his livelihood over it.
This is Alan Freed, the old king insider, and it's time again for another of your favorite rock and roll sessions.
Cited as one of the most influential disc jockeys of the 1950s, it was Alan Freed's rock and roll madness that had teenagers embarking on a cultural revolution, a revolution that would eventually destroy Alan Freed's career. As the top DJ at WINS in New York, Alan defied the musical taste of the old guard, replacing Bing Crosby with Bo Diddley and dropping Frank Sinatra for Little Richard.
If he played that record for you, it was a smash.
He played the hell out of both of the records, you know what I'm saying? Because I was a brand new thing.
Known for his racially mixed, star-studded rock and roll concerts, Freed was hated in the anti-rock circles.
Religious organizations, the government organizations,
frowned upon Alan Freed playing mainly black music. The country is going to go to hell. He's going to divide this country with this kind of music, and he's doing it now. You can't judge a book by looking at the cover.
Congress and federal investigators began to look into the practices of record companies offering incentives termed as payola to disc jockeys.
There was no Rolling Stone magazine, there was no MTV. You had the radio and disc jockeys, and if you couldn't get your record on the radio, forget it, it was dead.
A lot of people were accepting money for playing records. Freed was kind of an anomaly because sometimes there could be a $100 bill stuck in a single, and if he didn't like the record, he wouldn't touch it.
There was no federal law against taking payola. However, in New York, where Alan Freed worked, there was a commercial driver's law outlawing the form of payola.
People came out from the woodwork saying they gave Alan this, they gave Alan that. They got him investigated.
In 1960, congressional hearings on payola began, with key figures in the music industry as witnesses.
The two biggest witnesses to testify were Alan Freed and Dick Clark. There were two widely different outcomes.
There were a lot of people like Dick Clark who admitted to the Senate committee that they took 10 times what Freed ever took, and nothing ever happened to those people at all.
Mr. Freed, did you ever accept payola to play a record?
No, I did not.
At no time?
No time and no further comment.
Armed with evidence presented during the investigations, the New York District Attorney arrested Alan Freed.
They hit Alan with like 26 counts of commercial bribery, receiving money to play records. One day he was the king of rock and roll, the biggest thing going, and the next day he was off the air.
It was the death of early rock and roll.
Well, and it was the death of early rock and roll because Alan Freed had a huge cultural impact on youth culture back in those days. So the video just talked about how there was, in those days, no Rolling Stone magazine, no other sorts of big media platforms telling young people what music was hip, what was cool, what was the newest thing. DJs had a lot of that power. Radio was a big youth media. And it was directed a lot at young people. And so radio personalities, DJs, they had a lot of influence over young people. They could get throngs and hordes of young people to show up at a remote event like that just by talking about it a little bit. The power and the influence of the DJ. Cousin Brucey, back in the day when the Beatles made their first appearance here in the United States and they flew into what is now JFK Airport in New York City. As they were in transit somewhere, I think even coming from a cab on the street into the radio station where Cousin Brucey was going to be interviewing them, one of the fans reached out and grabbed onto Ringo's Starr and yanked off a St. Jude medal, no, it was a St. Christopher medal that his mother had gave him and he wore all the time as kind of like a good luck charm. So, you know, he's 21 years old and the Beatles are like 19 to 21 years old at the time they're being mobbed and thronged by all of these people, and they get into the studio and, you know, whoever it was had a pretty damn good the memento there, right? They had a really great souvenir from the Beatles that if they still had today would be worth, you know, $100,000. But it was really important to Ringo when they got on the air. Ringo was the drummer of the Beatles, and that's who the medal got stolen from or ripped off his neck. And when they got on the air with Cousin Brucey, he made a plea to whoever it was that had his medal to just return it and said, you know, do this, it's very simple. No one will ever know that it was you. Just drop it in an envelope, stick it in the mailbox to us, and, you know, you're doing the right thing. And they did. So the American DJ had a lot of pull and a lot of influence over young people. There's a movie, American Graffiti, and it's from the mid-1970s, and it's a nostalgic look back at the late 1950s, early 1960s era. And Wolfman Jack is featured in that movie because Wolfman Jack out in California was another kind of high energy, over the top personality DJ with a lot of influence over youth culture. And so he makes an appearance in this movie as himself, And you can see in certain scenes how influential and important he is, right? To what young people are thinking and feeling and their likes and dislikes, super influential. So DJs have a lot of power, except that now the Congress is starting to look into this practice, and it's not because there is something they feel is totally ethically wrong with DJs taking money to put a record in more rotation, taking bribes or compensation for accommodating a record label or an artist. It isn't that. It's that Alan Freed promoted interracial events, concerts, dances, sock hops, things like that. Back in 1959 and 1960, when segregation was intense, and these dance halls, these places that people would go to dance before clubs and things like that became popular with young people, these youth dance halls. You know, on a Thursday night, they would be open only to black patrons, and on a Friday night, they would be open only to white patrons. That's how segregated things were. However, on a Thursday night, most of these dance halls had balconies around them for sitting and drinking and watching the dance floor, right? The white patrons would come in and they couldn't go on the dance floor. They weren't allowed to enter the dance floor, but they could go up to the balconies, and they sat up there and took copious notes about the latest dance moves and things like that. So, you know, black culture and black music has always been attractive and uplifting, and it's attracted a large fan base. And youth culture back then especially were really turned on by the beat and the drive and the swing of rock and roll, and just the whole feeling of it. And so, you know, Alan Freed promoted these kinds of dances where black and white attendees were on the floor together. It was unheard of. And I know this sounds like, oh, BFD. It was a big freaking deal back then. You know, interracial dating was illegal in some states, many states still in 1960 in this country. In some dance halls, they would let black and white teenagers out on the dance floor together, or young people, but they would string a big rope like a cable down the middle of the dance floor, so you had to stay on your side and you had to stay on your side. That, my friends, is institutional racism, and the legacy of that lives on. It's hard to shake that kind of indoctrination off of a culture and a society. It's partly why we have still the struggle that we have with racism. When it's promoted and institutionalized by your own government or your own you know, powers that be that influence your world, you know, it's hard to shake that off. Anyway, that's why Alan Freed was persecuted the way that he was, because as the video had just said, Dick Clark, other famous Casey Kasem, other famous DJs from that era who really appealed to young people, but weren't going as over the top as Alan Freed was about promoting these interracial dance and concert happenings back in those days. You know, they weren't persecuted the same way he was. And in the end, Alan Freed, who had coined the phrase rock and roll from the black community, having heard it as a little lexicon that referred to having a really good time, sometimes having a really, really good time. But anyway, so he sort of usurped that phrase and was putting it out on the radio, so he really labeled this style of R&B high driving music as rock and roll. It came straight out of the black community, and because he was such a promoter of things that were a little more free thinking than what the status quo and the establishment were ready for, he was persecuted. So he died 2 years later, penniless, and now he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and in the Radio Broadcast Hall of Fame, but didn't get to experience or lived that reality himself, but he was so instrumental, Alan Freed, in youth radio and putting an exclamation point at the end of tolerance and integration. So now, with the whole idea of payola and wanting to stop that practice because, the status quo, the establishment, the powers that be at that time that want to stem the tide of this cultural revolution that seems to be happening where white kids are starting to really appreciate and want to participate in things that are considered black culture. And they felt like that was going to be destructive to the white race, basically. The powers that be are deciding that the power of the DJ themselves is a little bit too much. If they can have that much influence over what types of music young people listen to, or what kinds of fashions they wear, what kind of movies they want to go and see, all those kinds of ideas about what was cool and what was happening in pop culture, the DJ was talking about. If they had that much influence, it was a dangerous thing. And so they directed radio stations to start to have a music director who would be the focal point of deciding fairly and equitably whether or not how many times in an hour you would hear one performer over another. So it would have nothing to do necessarily with what the record companies were trying to push and promote. It would be a little more fair and spread out. So you would have maybe more opportunity to hear Chubby Checker, who was the Twist and an African-American rock and roll singer, and Pat Boone, who was kind of a pop music crooner in the early 1960s, harkening back to the early 1950s, and a sound most young people, youth, at least cool youth, were not interested in. But they wanted to have that influence of, more white performers, more watered down sound that was a little more like the traditional music they'd been listening to in the late 1950s. All this rock and roll stuff was just garbage. So they thought putting in a music director, making stations have that position was going to help that. It didn't. I mean, at this point, everything is out of Pandora's box, and let's use every euphemism about that you can think of. The horse is out of the barn, the cows are out of the pasture, the toothpaste is out of the toothpaste tube. But youth movement's already taken off, and rock and roll is here to stay. And so what happens next is radio and popular music and culture is being disseminated on radio. AM is the big frequency that everybody's listening to. But now at the late 1960s, the counterculture is starting to take over FM. And more underground rock and roll, more alternative rock, or stuff that more hippies were listening to was less commercialized on FM. And the DJs had more of that laid-back vibe and attitude. But also FM was more suited to music. And because it had better sound, music just started to naturally drift over to FM. And during the 1970s, a big change happened. Most music formats went over to FM. And AM was talk and sports. And it stayed that way. In the 1980s, saw a huge increase in that. And then the 1980s style started to change too, as it's having competition from television. And then even into the 90s, with a little bit of the internet starting to peek its head in at it, morning shows are starting, especially morning shows, but DJs on the radio are starting to really do things to attract an audience and keep an audience. So this is the era that Howard Stern and Opie and Anthony and Imus, Don Imus, all came out of, is the 1980s morning show, shock jock kind of a thing, the morning zoo and all that stuff, over-the-top entertainment. It was kind of a competition to see who could say the most outlandish, shocking thing, and that's how they kept Nielsen ratings up, and that's how they kept listeners. So nationally syndicated shows on radio that you might know about. Again, Howard Stern, he's on XM now, but he's been on all the different networks and off for one reason or another, mostly because he won't censor himself and his content, and really values freedom of speech. So he's on XM, where he doesn't have that same constraint because it's satellite and not terrestrial radio. Opie and Anthony have a morning show still to this day. They are nationally syndicated. Imus died last year, but until about a year and a half ago, he was consistently on the radio. He had a talk show. Think about Rush Limbaugh. He's been on the radio forever. He's another nationally syndicated radio personality. Casey Kasem is gone for about the last 10 years, but that doesn't stop the hits from coast to coast with Casey Kasem being broadcast across America in syndication every weekend. There's a compilation of a throwback show from some time period 30 years ago or whatever. So you can turn on the radio on a Saturday morning maybe and hear Casey Kasem's Coast to Coast. American Top 40 is the show, and it'll be from 1972, but generally that week. So if it's whatever this past weekend was, right, the 20th or whatever, it would be so this is America Top 40, because this was originally broadcast from like the late 1960s to the mid 1980s. Every weekend, Casey Kasem had this syndicated show, America Top 40. So now they play reruns of it. That's what I'm getting at. I knew there was an easier explanation. Dick Clark had a long-running, nationally syndicated show, especially an oldies show later on when tastes change. And, he was always like the voice of New Year's Eve and the countdown in Times Square. Then he died several years ago. And now Ryan Seacrest, another radio host who's gotten into different media, has that role with the countdown for New Year's Eve at Times Square. Cousin Brucey is still on the air. Alice Cooper, rocker, Alice Cooper, Schools Out, $1 Billion Babies, all that stuff. Alice Cooper has a syndicated classic rock show that airs on a lot of classic rock stations throughout the country. Very popular. Delilah has a nationally syndicated show that runs Monday through Friday every evening, usually on soft rock stations, soft adult contemporary stations, that plays a lot of ballads and love songs, and she reads letters and emails from different fans and listeners who have shout outs to their loved ones, or just ask her to pick out a song for them because they're going through a tough time. So Delilah is everybody's big radio hug. And then, like I said, Rush Limbaugh, Wendy Williams is another big hip hop DJ. She's crossed over to television. Ryan Seacrest we talked about, and then Danny Bonaducci. So he's an interesting character. He's a radio personality. I think he does a morning show, and I don't remember what city it's out of at this point, but I want to say Chicago. Just feels like that. I could be totally wrong though, and I admit that. Anyway, Danny Bonaducci, there was this show in the 70s called The Partridge Family, and it was all about this musical family that traveled around in this multicolored psychedelic school bus and did shows. Like, that was their family's gig, right? The mom was in the band, the dad had passed away, older brother and sister, middle brother, two little kids in the family that were adorable as they played the tambourine and the maracas. But Danny Bonaducci was the middle child in this show, little redhead troublemaker mischief kid, and he was always like the gag in the show too. He was probably the funniest character on that show, and it ran throughout the beginning of the 1970s rather. Anyway, Danny Bonaducci, child star, ended up, when that show ended, not having such a great life for a little while. As a young adult, didn't find his niche where he belonged, had drug and alcohol problems, and was arrested a few times. And it made, people news and all of that sort of thing, because he was a child star, who was falling down on his face, and that sort of stuff is dirty laundry that people like to hear. So anyway, he had this really sort of unhappy period, but then he straightened his stuff out and he started radio, and now he's got this really great following and a good broadcast, and he's very happy as a nationally syndicated radio broadcaster, and he does do a morning show. I'm like 900% sure about that. So, just to kind of wrap things up, the internet changed radio a lot. Look at what we're doing with Live 365. People started to move away from radio being the place where they got their cool from and their cues of what movies to see and what celebrities were cool and what clothes were, all that stuff. Radio stopped being the voice to youth about that. It started to change its role in people's lives too. And so did the DJ. So less over-the-top characters anymore, coming back more of a narrative kind of role again to the beginning of radio somewhat, where they're an accessory, they're not the focal point, they're a little more laid back, they're not the main focus of the radio program like they were in the late 1960s, in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, all the way up and through the 70s and the 80s, when a lot of these people that just talked about started to become famous in radio and become celebrities in their own right. So, internet changes radio. We just kind of figured all of that out, right? If you can listen to music via other platforms, streaming platforms, without commercial interruption or limited commercial interruption, if you could choose your own playlist more, people like choices, and you guys have a ton of choices in media. But radio is still relevant because now it's a lifestyle companion, and especially when it focuses on local radio and local issues, it's very relevant and very important. So, satellite radio is kind of the last thing. Classic DJs and others find their home in space, and that's exactly what happened to people like Howard Stern and Opie and Anthony and Cousin Brucey and all these other famous DJs who had these stellar careers that anybody who wants to have a career in radio would just envy. They found a second home there. There's all sorts of genres on Sirius XM, and they have a little more creative and personal expression license again. So it's a good home for them. And anyway, so that's really what I wanted to lecture to you guys about the state of this profession. If you do decide that being a radio host, and we call it a host at WXTC more than a DJ, because I want you guys to realize that when you have a listener that spends time on your broadcast, their time, it's the same as having somebody come into your house for a visit. You want to offer them something, make them comfortable, and make them feel happy that they're there. So if you think about it like you're the host and they're your guest, it makes it a better content. It makes you a better personality on the air because you're thinking about your listener and not just your own head. You're not there to please yourself, then you're thinking about making the people that are tuning in happy. And that's what I want you guys to do with this playlist that you all are developing for your shows, or this playlist show that you're creating for Live 365, is be thinking about your listener and the times that we're going through right now. Think about what kind of encouraging things you could say to people, and make yourself feel better too to be thinking that way. Think about tips that you could give people, or content that will help to distract them from what's going on right now, make them feel a little less alone. All right, anybody have any questions before we break? Don't forget about your assignments that you have. Get that form done. It's not hard. Just get it done. Quit procrastinating. And watch that video so you're prepared to do the think response. Get your show done. Get me your show log. That's what needs to happen. And EJ, email me with your specific questions about what you need to know. Maybe I will connect you with one of our students who's having success with Live 365 in the classroom, and they can help you to better answer some questions too, like Eli W., who's figured this out, or Megan, or Devin, or some of the rest of you who have figured out how to work things out with Live 365. But anyway, email me and let me know. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'll talk to you all on Tuesday. I'll see you then. This video will be up on YouTube soon. And you all have a good weekend and get your work done. Let's create some fun.